orchestrated fresh narrative with new characters, forensic accountant protagonist, and con artist scheme orchestrated fresh narrative with new characters, forensic accountant protagonist, and con artist scheme. The woman caught my sleeve near the dessert table, the kind of grip that means business, and put her mouth close to my ear so nobody at the engagement party would hear her. "Whatever that man asks your daughter to sign before the wedding," she said, "don't let her sign it." Then she let go, smiled like we'd just talked about the weather, and disappeared into the crowd of 200 people who'd come to celebrate my only child, finding the love of her life. I stood there with a glass of Cabernet going warm in my hand, and my heart doing something I hadn't felt in years. Let me back up. My name is Russell Avery. I'm 67 years old, and for most of the last decade I've been a widower, living alone on 40 acres in the Blue Ridge foothills outside Asheville, North Carolina. My grandfather bought that land in 1949 for almost nothing, back when nobody wanted a stony hillside an hour from a real town. He'd laugh himself sick if he could see what the developers are offering for it now. There's a creek, a stand of old hardwoods, a farmhouse my father rewired by hand, and a back porch where I drink one bourbon a night and watch the light go purple over the ridge. It's the only home my daughter Hannah has ever really known. Her mother, Maureen, passed 6 years ago. Pancreatic. It took her in 4 months, and there wasn't a thing the money could do about it. And I had more money than people assumed, though that's a story I'll come to. For most of those 4 months, Hannah drove up every weekend from her apartment in Charlotte and sat on the edge of that bed reading her mother the gardening catalogs Maureen loved, the two of them planning a spring garden. Everybody in the room knew Maureen would never see. That's the kind of person my daughter is. She's a high school chemistry teacher. She remembers every student's name and most of their birthdays. She is generous and trusting and warm, and if you've raised a child like that, you know it's the best thing in the world right up until the moment it's the most dangerous. Hannah met Trevor Doyle at a hospital foundation gala the spring before all this started. He was charming in the way that registers before you can name it. Tall, easy, good teeth, a handshake that landed somewhere between a politician and a preacher. He ran something called Doyle Capital Group, which as far as I could tell put on seminars about building generational wealth and bought up tired commercial buildings to flip. He talked about money the way some men talk about football, with that warm fluency that makes you feel like an insider for listening. The first time Hannah brought him to the farm, he stood on my porch, looked out at my grandfather's 40 acres and said, "Mr. Mother, Avery, do you have any idea what this parcel is worth to the right developer?" I said I had a rough idea. I had a precise idea, actually, but I found it pays to be underestimated. That's the part I should explain, because it matters to everything that came after. For 35 years, I worked as a forensic accountant. I started at a regional bank chasing embezzlers and ended up spending the back half of my career with the Criminal Investigation Division of the Treasury, the people who put away the ones the FBI hands off because the crime is buried in spreadsheets instead of fingerprints. I have sat across the table from men who moved $40 million through 6 shell companies and looked me in the eye and swore on their children there was nothing there. There was always something there. Numbers don't lie. People lie, and then the numbers tell on them, and my whole career was learning to read the tattle. But to Hannah, I was just Dad, the tax guy, the man who did everybody's returns at the kitchen table in March. To Maureen's side of the family, I was Russell, who's good with figures. I never corrected anybody. After Maureen died, I let the world believe I was a comfortable, simple retiree with a nice piece of land and a slow life. I liked being invisible. I had no idea how useful that invisibility was about to become. So when the stranger whispered her warning at the engagement party and melted back into the crowd, she had no way of knowing she'd just handed a confession to one of the few men in that vineyard equipped to read it. I didn't sleep much that night. I sat in my study with the desk lamp on and Maureen's photograph watching me from the shelf, and I did the only thing I know how to do when something doesn't reconcile. I started pulling threads. The next morning, I drove to the county register of deeds and the courthouse, because public records are the most underrated weapon a careful man owns. Anybody can look. Almost nobody does. I pulled the corporate filings for Doyle Capital Group and 3 other entities with Trevor's name on them. I pulled UCC liens. Those are the public notices a lender files when somebody borrows against property. And I found a pattern of loans taken out against assets, and then the assets going quiet, transferred, dissolved. I found 2 lawsuits in 2 different states, both settled, both sealed, which is a thing that costs money and tells you the other side had something worth burying. I found a woman named Delia listed as a former co-owner on one of those dissolved companies, and I had a strong feeling I'd already met her, sleeve grip and all. Then I called Hank Sandoval. Hank and I came up together at Treasury. He retired 2 years before I did, and now does private forensic work for law firms and insurance companies, the kind of man who can find out in a week what a normal person couldn't find in a year. I told him what I had. I heard him whistle through his teeth. "Russell," he said, "you want me to be thorough or you want me to be fast?" "I want you to be right," I said. "She's marrying him in 9 weeks. What Hank found over the next month I will carry to my grave, because it nearly came true for my daughter. Trevor Doyle was not a developer. Trevor Doyle was a marriage. That was the whole business model. He found women who come into land or money, a farm, an inheritance, a life insurance payout, a settlement, and he married into it. The sister who'd started appearing at our family dinners, a sharp, pretty woman named Camille, who called herself the CFO of Doyle Capital and laughed at all my jokes a half-second too fast. She wasn't his sister, she was his partner. In 2 of the prior cases they'd run the same play. They persuade the new spouse to fold the family asset into a jointly owned LLC for tax efficiency and to protect the marriage, then quietly borrow against it to the hilt, move the cash offshore through the seminar business, and walk away in the divorce or the bankruptcy, leaving the victim holding the debt and the empty deed. There had been a man in Tulsa named Glenn who'd inherited his parents' machine shop and the land under it. He'd signed it into Trevor and Camille's LLC 11 months before his wife filed. By the time it was done, he'd lost the shop, the land, and his credit, and the non-disclosure he'd signed to get a sliver of it back kept him from warning anybody. The woman at my party, Delia, had been the one before Glenn. She hadn't signed the NDA. She'd lost less and kept her voice, and she'd spent 2 years quietly following Trevor's engagements online, showing up at parties, whispering in the ears of the next family's parents, getting waved off as bitter or crazy more often than not. She hadn't been waved off by me. Here's the thing I keep coming back to. I knew all of this by week 3, and I did not tell Hannah. People ask me about that later, and some of them judge me for it, and I understand. But I had spent a career watching prosecutors lose airtight cases because they moved too soon, and I had spent a lifetime knowing my daughter. If I'd walked into her kitchen with a folder and said the man you love is a con artist, Trevor would have had a soft, sorrowful explanation ready before I finished the sentence. He'd have wept. He'd have told her that her grieving father couldn't bear to lose her, that I'd hired some investigator to dig up dirt out of jealousy. That wasn't it sad? Wasn't it sad? And my warm, trusting daughter, who had already half decided that this man's love was proof she was lovable, might have chosen him. Once she chose him, she'd defend him, and once she defended him, I'd lose her, and he'd have her and the land and a clean shot at me. So I did what I learned to do at the table across from men far smarter than Trevor Doyle. I gathered, I positioned, and I waited for the moment when the truth wouldn't come from me at all. Meanwhile, I played the part. I offered to host the wedding at the farm. Maureen would have wanted it under the hardwoods, and I paid for the tent and the caterer and the good chairs, near $40,000 before it was over. And I let Trevor watch me write the check so he'd believe I was exactly the soft old man he needed me to be. Camille sent me a thank you card she clearly bought by the box. Trevor started stopping by on his own, settling into Maureen's chair on the porch like he already owned the view, floating the idea, gentle as you please, that after the wedding it might make sense for Hannah and me to modernize the estate planning, move the farm into a family LLC, tax advantages, protected from creditors. He'd be happy to set it up. Camille handled all their entity work. That's awfully kind, I said. I'll think on it. I have never in my life wanted to put a man through a window the way I wanted to put Trevor Doyle through one. And I smiled and offered him another iced tea. The thing finally broke open 6 days before the wedding, and it didn't break because of me. It broke because of my daughter, which is the only way it could have healed. Hannah's laptop had died. She taught from it, and it finally gave out, and she'd been using Trevor's tablet to finish her grades and her lesson plans. He'd left it logged in. She wasn't snooping. She told me that a dozen times afterward, crying, like she needed me to know she wasn't the kind of person who snoops. And I told her a dozen times that it wouldn't have mattered if she had been. A message came in across the top of the screen while she was working. Then another. Camille, to Trevor, and Hannah, who was not a snoop, read them, because any human being alive would have read them. She drove up to the farm that night without calling. I heard the gravel and I knew. She came through the kitchen door with her face the color of paper and her phone in her hand. And she'd photographed all of it before she'd had the sense to be careful. Screen after screen of two people discussing my daughter the way you discuss a transaction. They called her the teacher. They called the farm the dirt. Camille had written, almost word for word, once the dirt's in the LLC, we pulled a line of credit and we're clear inside a year. She'll never read the operating agreement. She trusts him. And Trevor had written back something I won't repeat in front of decent people. Something about how the soft ones are the easy ones. And there was a line about me. The old man's harmless. He does taxes. That I have to admit gave me a grim kind of joy, even in that terrible kitchen. Hannah put the phone on the table and she shook. I was going to give him the farm, she said. He asked me to sign it Thursday, before the wedding, he called it a gift to the marriage. Dad, I was going to do it. She looked at me with those eyes she got from her mother, and she said the thing I'd been dreading and waiting for in equal measure. How could I be this stupid? Everyone said he was perfect. Everyone said he was perfect. Everyone. I came around the table and I held my daughter the way I held her the night her mother died, and I let her cry herself empty, and when she could hear me I said the truest thing I know. You're not stupid. You're trusting. He spent his whole life learning to aim at people exactly like you. And the fact that he could find you and use you is a mark against him, not you. Don't you dare let him make you ashamed of being the best thing in this family. Then she wiped her face and she said, what do we do? Everything's paid for. Everyone's coming. He's expecting me to sign Thursday. And I felt the old stillness come over me. The one I used to feel right before the interview, where I already knew the answer and was only waiting for the man to say it out loud. Do you trust me? I asked. She said she did, without a pause, and that's a thing I'll keep forever. Then you're going to sign on Thursday, I said. You're going to go to that closing exactly like he expects, and you're going to leave the rest to your old man who does taxes. I made 3 phone calls that night. The first was to Naomi Reyes, an attorney I trusted for 20 years, sharp as a fillet knife and twice as fast. I told her what we had. She told me to send her everything and not to touch the original devices. The second was to Hank, to compile his file into something a prosecutor could hold in one hand. The third was the one that took the longest, because I had to go up a chain of people I hadn't spoken to since I retired. But at the end of it, I was on the phone with an investigator named Pruitt at the State Attorney General's office, and Pruitt, it turned out, already had a thin file on Doyle Capital Group from a complaint out west. He'd never had a victim willing to walk in before the money moved. He'd never had a forensic accountant hand him the whole architecture wrapped in a bow. Mr. Avery, Pruitt said carefully, You understand we can't promise how this plays out. I understand it better than you do, son, I said, not unkindly. I spent 35 years on your side of this call. I'm not asking you to promise. I'm asking you to be in the room. The signing was set for Thursday morning at a title company off the interstate. The kind of beige office with bad coffee and a conference room that smells like printer toner. Trevor had arranged it himself. He thought he'd built the room. He had no idea who else had been invited. Hannah went in first, on time, in the blue dress her mother loved, and I have never in my life been prouder of anyone's steadiness. Trevor was already there, and Camille beside him in her CFO blazer, a stack of documents squared on the table, the operating agreement that would have folded my grandfather's 40 acres into their machine for stripping it bare. Trevor stood when Hannah came in and kissed her cheek and called her sweetheart and asked if she'd slept, and she said she had. And she sat, and she set her purse on the table, and she did not shake. The girl had her mother's spine after all. Then the door opened, and the rest of us came in. Me first, with a banker's box I set on the table with a soft, heavy thump. Then Naomi Reyes with her briefcase and her court face. Then Pruitt and a second investigator, and behind them a uniformed deputy who stayed by the door. I watched Trevor's face do the thing I'd waited weeks to watch it do. The charm flickered. The smile stayed, but the eyes behind it started moving fast, the way a man's eyes move when he's reaching for which story to tell. "Russell," he said warmly, "I didn't realize it was a family affair." "It is now," I said, and I sat down across from him, slow, the way you do when you've got all the time in the world and the other man's running out. "Before my daughter signs anything, I thought we'd reconcile the books. I'm an accountant. Old habit." He laughed, easy. "There's nothing to reconcile, Russell. It's a standard family LLC. Camille's done 100 of these." "She's done at least 4, I agreed, and I opened the box. I didn't shout. I have never once gotten a confession by shouting. I laid it out the way I'd lay it out for a grand jury, page by page, calm as a man reading a weather report. The dissolved entities, the UCC liens, the Tulsa machine shop, and a man named Glenn who lost everything 11 months after he signed a document that looked just like the one squared on the table in front of my daughter. Delia's company dissolved the same way. The pattern of loans drawn against assets the week after the assets changed hands. I slid Naomi the operating agreement, and she found, in 90 seconds, the buried clause that gave the managing member, Trevor, unilateral authority to encumber the property without the consent of the other member. My daughter, who trusted him, who would never have read it. Camille was the first to break for the door. The deputy was standing in front of it. "This is insane," Trevor said, and the warmth was gone now, and I finally got to see the thing underneath, which was nothing at all. A cold, flat nothing. "Hannah, baby, your father's been after me since day one. You know that. He can't stand to lose you. He's making this up." "They called me the teacher," Hannah said quietly. She didn't yell either. "She got that from me. You called the farm the dirt. You called my father harmless." She put her phone on the table. "Screen up, the message is right there. He's not, by the way. I'd saved the last folder for the end, the way you do. I said it in front of Pruitt, and I let Trevor watch me do it. For the record, I said, since you were curious about what I did before I retired. I spent 35 years as a forensic accountant, the last 17 with the Criminal Investigation Division of the Treasury Department. I put men in federal prison who are a great deal more careful than you, Mr. Doyle. You picked a family with a soft, kind, trusting daughter, and you did your homework on her. You just didn't do it on her father." Pruitt read them their rights at a beige conference table that smelled like toner, and I want to tell you it was thunder and lightning, but it wasn't. That's the part nobody puts in the stories. It was quiet. It was paperwork. It was a man who'd spent his life pretending to be powerful, discovering, in real time, that he'd sat down across from the real thing and never seen it coming. Camille was already trying to cut a deal before she reached the parking lot, offering up Trevor for herself. which told you everything about what their love had ever been. The wedding did not happen. We told the 200 guests the truth, or enough of it, and you would be surprised how few of them were surprised. Delia came to the farm a week later and sat on my porch and cried, and I poured her a bourbon, and she told me she'd warned 6 families over 2 years, and mine was the first that listened. I told her she'd saved my daughter's life. I believe that's the plain truth. The case took the better part of a year. Once there was a willing victim and a public arrest, the others came out of the woodwork. Glenn called Pruitt the second the news hit. NDA be damned, said he didn't care anymore, said he'd rather lose the settlement than stay quiet while it happened to one more person. Delia testified. So, did a woman from Sacramento none of us had known about? Trevor Doyle is serving a sentence now in a state facility, and the federal charges are still pending, and Camille took her deal and got a shorter stretch and a record that will follow her like a shadow for the rest of her life. The 40 acres my grandfather bought for almost nothing are still mine, still in my name, still unencumbered, still waiting under the hardwoods for whatever Hannah decides to do with them someday. She moved back up to Asheville that fall. She's still teaching. It took her a long while to trust the ground under her feet again, and I didn't rush her, because some things you can't reconcile in a quarter. They take years. There's a man now, a science teacher at her school, a quiet, unremarkable, deeply decent man named Daniel who fixes other people's cars on weekends for free and never once asked her a single question about money or land. She made him wait a long time. She told me, half laughing, that she'd run his name through every public record she could find before she let him buy her dinner, and I told her that's my girl, and I meant it as the highest compliment I have. She asked me once, on the porch, the bourbon going purple in the glass and the light going purple on the ridge, why I'd let everyone believe all those years that I was just the tax man, why I'd hidden what I really was. I thought about it a long time before I answered, because she deserved a true answer and not a tidy one. Because the loud ones are usually hollow, I finally said. Trevor spent every minute of every day convincing people he was powerful. A man with real teeth doesn't have to. He's too busy doing the work. I didn't hide what I was to fool anybody. I hid it because I never needed it, until the one day I did, and then it was there, steady, the way your mother always said I was steady, like it was a flaw. I took a sip. Turned out steady was the whole thing. Hannah leaned her head on my shoulder the way she did when she was small, and we watched the dark come up out of the trees. And somewhere, a long way from that porch, a man who thought my daughter was an easy mark was learning, slowly, on a state schedule, exactly what it costs to mistake a quiet man for a harmless one. I didn't gloat about it. I'd learned a long time ago that the best revenge isn't the loud kind. It's the kind that lets you sit on your own porch, on your own land, beside the person they tried to take from you and watch the stars come out one at a time and know the numbers came out right in the end. That's enough. That's the victory that matters. I keep going back to that beige conference room, the bad coffee, the toner smell, and the exact second Trevor Doyle understood that the harmless old tax man across the table had been counting his every move for weeks. Nothing about that moment was loud, and that's the part I want people to carry with them. He didn't lose to thunder. He lost to arithmetic he never imagined I could do, and my daughter was saved because I'd spent a lifetime refusing to let anger make me careless. Here's the plain truth I came away with. A scheme like the one Trevor and Camille ran only works on a stage built out of somebody else's good heart. Hannah is generous and trusting, and they studied that the way a burglar studies a lock. But her warmth was never the flaw. The flaw was believing that kindness and caution are opposites, that to love openly you have to stop watching carefully. They don't cancel each other out. The strongest people I've ever known carry both at once. And the day my daughter learned to run a man's name through the public record before she let him buy her dinner, she didn't become colder. She became whole. I think a lot about why the numbers always come out right in the end, and it isn't luck. Cause and effect are patient. Trevor built his whole life on the bet that nobody would do the boring, honest work of checking, and for years he was right, until he sat across from a man who'd made that boring work his life. He chose deceit, and deceit leaves a trail, and the trail was always going to find him. That's not fate. That's just what dishonesty costs when somebody finally bothers to add it up. If I could hand my grandchildren three things, they wouldn't be money or land. The first is a spine that won't bend to make a lie comfortable. The refusal to take what isn't yours, even when it's easy, even when no one's looking. The second is the clear eye that can tell the loud, hollow version of success from the quiet, real one, and the discipline to verify before you trust. And the third is the steadiness Maureen used to tease me about, the willingness to wait, to do the slow work, to keep reconciling the books long after a flashier man would have given up or blown up. Trevor had charm and nerve and not one of those three things, and in the end he had nothing at all. I sit on that porch most evenings now. The land's still ours, my daughter healed and careful and happy, and I think the best revenge a man can take is simply to live honestly and openly on ground nobody could steal from him. That's enough. That's the whole of it.